Excellent. Wonderful. So, everybody, welcome. To those who have just finished all the Jewish holidays, congratulations for making it through this crazy time. Um, I want to mention a few things before we get started with our talk tonight with Amanda Beckwith from Virginia Distillery. So I made a mistake on our last session that was pointed out to me by my partner, Eric Leader. And the mistake I made was that I said that our last session was our 42nd session, and I was wrong. Our last session was session 41. Our session today, this is session 40, session 42. So those of you who know the significance of that, congratulations. This is session number 42. I'd like to welcome you tonight to a wonderful session. I'm really looking forward to this. We have with us Amanda Beckwith, lead blender of Virginia Distillery. Amanda, can you please tell us where you are right now?
Right now, I am in Virginia. I am just about 35 minutes from our distillery in a tiny little one-stoplight town called Livingston, and I personally am in Charlottesville.
Wonderful. And are the leaves starting to turn there yet?
Oh, it's gorgeous. We have red, orange, gold. It's stunning.
Ah, that's wonderful. That's great. You know, I have to read something from your website here, which really fascinates me. Everybody, you've got to hear what Amanda's job, how Amanda's job is described. Okay, quote, Amanda helped to develop and now leads the company's sensory and maturation program. In addition to overseeing company education and training, she has trained with industry legends, including nosing expert Nancy Fraley, Harry Cockburn, and the late Dr. Jim Swan. That's one heck of an introduction there.
Yeah, I'm very, very fortunate.
So how does one become the leader of a sensory and maturation program?
It's a funny journey. My background was nonprofit work. I helped run admissions at the Virginia Aquarium, and I love drinking single malts very, very much. I like all whiskey, but single malt was just from the get-go, like my first love. And I heard about this distillery that was going to open up in Virginia, and I thought it's going to be another bourbon distillery, but still very cool. And I went onto their website and saw that they were going to be making a single malt. And I think I blacked out. A few minutes later, I'd written a cover letter and I just kind of talked about who I was and what I liked. And they said, well, we're looking for someone to build a tour and tasting program. So I've been with the company for over 7 years, and I was there when we turned on our stills and the first distillate came running through. And it's been really fun because at the beginning we had Harry Cockburn, Jim Swan on site, and they were very generous with their time. They said, come hang out with us. I got to fill some of the first barrels and just soak up as much knowledge as I could. So over time, when the whiskey was aging up, I was learning as much as I could. Training, went to Scotland, was on the bourbon trail, doing as much as I could there, and trained with Nancy Fraley, and she helped me kind of hammer through my thoughts on what a good sensory panel would look like and getting everybody else educated. So that's kind of what kicked it all off.
That's incredible. So it really did start with you just approaching them, and you got in on the ground floor. I'm a little jealous, I have to say.
I still pinch myself.
No, and then to be mentored by those three people. So Nancy Fraley, for those of you who don't know, she's she has a company called Nosing Services. Okay, she's the director of research and an instructor of blending with ADI. Okay, so what was it like to work with somebody like Nancy Fraley?
I was stunned by how humble and fun and intelligent she is. She was brought on board because we started out with a product called BHW. It was a port cask finished whiskey, and so she was kind of helping frame that before we even had launched our own Courage and Conviction line. And she did a training for our team, and she singled me out and she said, you have a really good palate. I want to talk to you. I want to do more with you. And then we stayed in touch, and she told our CEO, Gareth, like, hey, she should be your master blender. And he gave me a lot of freedom to work with our team and to start putting together what I think is a good framework for grading whiskey, doing analysis, and then kind of putting everything together. So I took over the VHW line maybe 3 years ago, but Courage and Conviction, I was able to build, from the very first casks. I selected everything myself.
Wow. That's amazing. That really is incredible. And yes, I'm going to say it again. I am jealous. Harry Coburn. Okay, so he's pretty much like the engineer and production manager for a number of places for Morrison Bowmore. Okay,
Yes.
um, and so he's been involved with Bowmore, Glengarioch, and Auchentoshan. Can you tell us a little bit about your interactions with him and what you learned from him over the years?
Yes, he is the love of my life, as is his wife, Marlene. He's 85 now, I believe, and we email. He sends me letters and cards. I am so grateful for how helpful and fun he is. He really did come up with the flow of our distillery. So it's very linear. It makes a lot of sense. He was there watching everything be installed, from the mash tun, washbacks, everything. And just having his genius helped us so much down the road. It made us, well, it set us up for success. And he's one that back when I was still learning a lot, I'd get this concern of, okay, what about the stills wearing through? How do we know how to measure the thickness of the copper pot stills? And I get these weird questions that I just didn't have the answers for. And he always immediately wrote back, gave me all his insights, all his connections. And yeah, I talk to him as much as I can. And yeah, so
Wonderful.
grateful for all of his brilliance.
That's great. So I know people are getting a little antsy because we haven't started drinking yet, but I'm going to ask one more question before we actually start. Although, of course, anybody can start drinking, and the order is going to be the bourbon cask, then the sherry cask, then the cuvee. Jim Swan, the late great Jim
Yes.
Swan. All right. So Jim Swan has been influential in many of the distilleries that are near and dear to the hearts of the people on this call: Amrut, Cotswold, Kilchoman, M&H, Penderyn, Cavalan. Can you tell us a little bit about your interactions with him and some of your memories of him?
Yes. Well, my funniest memory of him is one day, it was a snowy Sunday, and he and Harry were both on site, and I asked if they wanted some soup, and I said tomato soup, and he and Harry in unison said tomato to correct me. But he was fascinating, and the biggest gift that he left me was his contacts. When we were getting started, he said, you need to make sure that you change your distillate and craft that around the environment that you have, because you have a really great subtropical 4-season climate in Virginia. And that kind of blew my brain, because I knew Virginia was humid. I knew we had very intense dynamic weather, but I wasn't picturing it the way he was. And that allowed us to really play around. And so he wrote an email to me, and he said, and it was to me, it was to Gareth, our CEO, just kind of his thoughts and framework of what casks we should be using. And that barrel recipe is something that he said, tweak it, learn and grow from this, but get your experimental sherries. Don't be afraid to use Fino. And that was just so instrumental for me, because some of the barrels that he recommended are late bloomers. And I thought, I don't know about this. And he definitely proved to be right. We lost him early February of 2017, but the emails that I have, the connections, I'm friends with people that he collaborated with to create new cask types in Spain and Portugal and France. And that is just an enormous gift, and I'll forever be grateful.
Right. And that definitely comes through in your spirit. So let's talk about the spirits. So the juice that goes into all your spirits. Okay, so I noticed that these are all 46%, or about, people can start tasting the bourbon if you'd like to do so. We're going to start doing that. Does the same juice go into all of your whiskey spirits, all of your single malts? Is it the same across the board?
Yeah, the exact same distillate. We're all about having a consistent spirit for me to work with in the cask. So that's where I get to be playful, is in the maturation profile. Although I will say we use 2 different strains of yeast. And the idea there is, one is the workhorse doing the job of converting the sugar over to alcohol. The other one is to develop the flavors, the fermentation esters that we really like.
Got it. So since we have the same juice in all of these, can you tell us about your grain? What grain goes into this? Where is it malted, etc.?
Absolutely. So we always use 2-row spring barley. The idea there, quality versus quantity, 2-row versus 6. The yield is just something that we look for. So much of it, we double distill 5 days out of the week now. So we do 2 tons of barley every milling run. So we go through 4 tons of barley most days.
Wow.
And so, yeah, our mash bill is very easy to remember, 100% malted barley. We've grown a little bit on site. We like working with Virginia barley when we can, but the nitrogen levels in our soil are very high, which is just not ideal. So we work with Murphy and Rood to malt our barley right here in Charlottesville, but that's only for the Virginia grown barley. We work with 600 plus farmers now through the North Midwest up into the southern reaches of Canada.
Well, when you're using so much barley, you need to make sure that you have a consistent supply. So you need to make sure you're not just working with 1 or 2 people.
Yes. And it's great because we can work with farmers, giving them the support, but different years, they have different yields. So we get the certificates of analysis. We say, yes, we want this. And then it all comes in already malted for us up in Montana. There's a malting place in Great Falls that's been really fabulous to work with.
Oh, that's wonderful. So then it's all the same juice that comes out. So then really it's all about the aging. Okay,
Yes,
it's all about the aging. So let's talk about this. So this, by the way, this is ridiculously drinkable. This bourbon, it's going down a little bit too easily. And I mean, it's 46, so it's not 40, it's 46, it's got some heft to it. But it's a little bit oily, it's nice, and you're definitely getting the bourbon, it's but there's something citrusy and bright to it.
I love that you brought in that citrus note.
Okay, so where's that coming from?
So some of it is formed back in fermentation. Absolutely. One thing that I'm really pleased with is I never planned to do this release, actually, the Courage and Conviction Bourbon Cask. It was something that it was a team decision. And it's amazing how many people say this is their favorite release. Roughly half of the whiskey we have aging in our cask houses is in first fill bourbon cask. So we're one state over from Kentucky. You get a lot of brown foremen coming through, and it's great because they'll call us and say, hey, we're dumping barrels today. We can have them loaded up at your distillery in 2 days. So they're very fresh. It's not like they have to ship them across the Atlantic to space at cooperage. And it works really well for us because we can plan very, very well around these. And so for me, because they've already had the harsher tannins taken out, because by law, bourbon has to age in new charred oak, we're giving these barrels a second life. It's much more sustainable, but all those bright notes that come through from the fermentation esters aren't masked. And so I will get pear, green apple, a little bit of banana sometimes, and those are all esters. Isoamyl acetate is one that I feel like really can come through in this really fun way. And at the same time, there's the balance. Sometimes I get a little cedar, lemon oil, cinnamon spice for sure on the finish. And I just think it's a really cool balance to see.
Are you getting these from different bourbon producers, like a multitude of bourbon producers?
Yes, the majority is Woodford Reserve. We get a lot of that. Willet has been fun. We just started getting Willet about a year ago, so we haven't released anything because we age a minimum of 4 years. Most of it's 5 or 6 years before I select it. Yeah, but I would say roughly 80% of our bourbon casks come from Brown Forman distilleries.
Okay. And then let's talk about consistency. Are you trying to make this the same every year, or, are you okay, or does the company, accept the fact that things can be different from year to year, and sometimes that's a good thing?
Well, I always want things to be better. So I want to keep climbing up and improving everything. But I do think consistency is important because people need to know that when they're going to buy a bottle, they know what it tastes like. It's not going to be some shocking surprise. So one of the ways that I achieve consistency, for the first couple releases, we had batches, and I would name the bottling runs after people who inspired me. So you can find a Harry Coburn, Nancy Freely, Jim Swan batch.
Nice. Nice.
What changed though is I kept feeling like I want to hold more back because I was always holding a little bit back to help build and compare with for my next bottling run. And I kept thinking, well, what I really want to do is the Solera style, where keep building in, take out what I need for bottling, but just to have a lot of consistency, always maintain a significant amount in vats. So 2 years ago, my dreams came true and the company built me a vatting house. And it literally has massive vats and we have a pipeline that can run through the side of the batting house directly onto our bottling line. So from one building to another.
You're like a kid in a candy store now.
I really am. It's so great.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. One comment about the batches is the bottles that we got do actually have the batch.
Yeah.
If anyone followed Scotch Trooper on Instagram, he was a good friend of mine, and his wife Tiffany is still a wonderful friend. So we wanted to do a dedication to him and donated.
Got it. Eric, can you show that again? It went off the screen pretty quickly.
Sorry.
Brett Friends.
Okay, details online. Okay, Brett Friends. Okay, got it. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. Wonderful. No, that's great. So then, the fact that you can now play with things, because of the vatting. Okay,
yes.
So that's wonderful. So that's great, because then you can really enjoy playing with it. Eric, by the way, I think you're on the screen right now. On my screen. If you want to move around so I can see Amanda. All right, Amanda. So let's talk a little bit about the casks. So once you get the casks, is there anything that you do to them before you start using them for the bourbon age?
We do a little sensory on the casks. It could consist of just looking at the exterior, smelling the inside, seeing what liquid, because I usually like to have a little bit of liquid in there. Harry Coburn recommended 18% liquid inside the casks for transport, just to make sure the staves stay very well hydrated. You don't have to worry about leaking. That's not such a big deal for what's coming over from Kentucky, because it's such a quick little journey.
Mm-hmm.
But for the casks coming from Spain and France and Portugal, it's much more significant. They're making an ocean journey, so that really helps. And I will sometimes drink and taste what's inside the cask as a great way to determine quality. Yeah,
you should do that. And by the way, that's a great segue to the sherry cask. That was a perfect segue to the sherry cask. Okay, so again, we have, it's the same juice going in, and so tell us about the sherry casks. How long it's aged in these sherry casks? How does that work?
Yeah, something that's a little bit unheard of is the fact that we do age in the sherry casks. It's no finishing, it's all primary maturation. And most times you'll see Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez as the two main sherry types. And they're both great fortified wines from Spain. Oloroso is fun because as these fortified wines are on the Solera system, there's usually this protective veil or blanket of yeast over the fortified wine, and Oloroso doesn't get that, so it's much more nutty and oxidized. So if you're getting any like candied hazelnut, I like to credit those Oloroso casks. And the PX, well, they take those grapes, dry them out, concentrate them, much more syrupy, decadent dried fruit, and I think that's phenomenal. But in addition to that, we also use Fino. And Fino Palomino, drier, lighter style. It's the number one grape used in sherry production, but usually those stay on the Soleras, and it's not typical to see them. And Jim Swan said, definitely give it a shot. And for the first 4 years, I was pulling samples and going, well, some candied pineapple, that's kind of cool, and some honey. It's just a little bit light, very sherried. And we hit 4.5 years, and there was the switch where I got Honey Nut Cheerios, and I kind of fell in love. So we use Fino, Oloroso, NPX, and occasionally I sneak in some Spanish oak too. So all of these sherry casks are made from Quercus alba, American white oak, but I do have a handful of Spanish oak. And for those of you who have the single Cask Nation release, that is a single barrel of Quercus robur that held both Oloroso and PX sherry before we moved our whiskey in. And it's just so decadent. It brings in leather and cocoa notes, sometimes coffee, that I really like. And so all those layers for me, I always feel like one of the best ways to determine a whiskey's quality is having complexity. And the sherry delivers. It will open up for days. I'll walk around for hours with a glass and just keep smelling it.
Yeah, no, it's delicious. I mean, the nose is incredible. Again, it's a little bit too drinkable. It's very refreshing. And some of the comments here, it's interesting because it doesn't taste like most sherry aged whiskeys, and I think it's because you have the different combinations that you're using. Does each batch have a different ratio of the Fino, Oloroso, PX?
Yeah, it does. I started out with my very first batch being equal amounts, and then I was like, I'm gonna keep playing with this. And I've started increasing the Fino as it gets older. So that's something that I think really sets us apart, and it's been fun to see this come of age in such a cool way.
Got it. But by the way, so you mentioned that you're going like 4 to 5 years on these things. Is it,
Mhm.
well, how much are you losing each year?
Oh, that's the heartbreaking side. So our first year is always the worst. And I mean, they say that in Scotland too. They usually lose about 2% that first year, and then it goes down to 1%, and over time, even less. Our first year, we saw some 12% loss, and I just thought, oh, this
Oh,
is not good. We have
ouch.
mellowed out. We're about 6% a year, depending on the cask, and I've already had 3 completely bone dry casks, and it's just
Oh,
placement. So we don't do any climate control. We have 2 metal clad cask houses now. We used to have a small dunnage style, but at capacity it held 600 casks.
yeah.
So we turned that over. It's a bottling house. But we have 6,000 in cask house 1, and we're building up to 6,000 in cask house 2. And it's just amazing because when you walk in, you can feel the airflow from one big fan in the back, and we have humidity pockets. We have areas where there's more warpage near the front door. And so you have, it's very not linear throughout the year, what you're seeing as far as the interaction between the casks and everything. But yeah, 6 to 8% annually is
Yeah,
average.
that's rough.
Oh.
Yeah, I visited Balcones in Waco
Yeah,
last year, and you know,
they gotta never
12%.
one lotto pot on their single malt for a reason.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible how much they lose every year. It's like if they go longer than 3 years, there's hardly anything left in some cases. They have one cask I think that went for 6 years and then ended up at like 35% of it or something was
Oh, it
left.
hurts. Yeah,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
don't want
it was
to have it
crazy.
turn into this 2x4. You know, you don't want to be chewing that versus having the bright fermentation notes still shining through.
Right. So one question I have for you, this harkens back to a special Macallan tasting I was at like over 20 years ago, where they had the Macallan 12, the Macallan 15, Macallan 18, and then they had this thing called the Macallan 18 Grand Reserve. We didn't know what that was. And then they had the 25 and the 30. And their master distiller at that point said that the Grand Reserve was from 18-year-old casks that he felt were just too good to go into the 18, right? So I'm curious, you're tasting all these different casks, do you ever find something that's just so darn good that you don't want to put it in with the other stuff?
Yes. I
What
started
happens then?
finding
What do you,
this.
what's the process then?
Yeah, so Nancy Fraley has this grading system of A, B, and C. C is a very foundational cask. It shows what you'd expect. B is well-rounded, has different notes, and A is like, wow, that's really unique. And I threw in a 1, 2, 3 for maturation, readiness, pluses and minuses. I went crazy. But I started finding these really distinct honey casks, and I just thought, man, they hit all the notes. They're complex, they're layered, they stand alone. Because often I find a beautiful cask and think that belongs with this is going to balance it out, or this is going to be the counterpoint. And the first one I found, I got so excited. I just called in 3 of the guys from the distillery and was like, quick, try this. And I named it the chocolate cherry cask. And it was a cuvee. And it was so good, I couldn't stop smiling. And so what we decided to do was every year I get to pick a handful of single barrels to release at whatever cask strength I want. And so what's fascinating is we fill our barrels at 62.5, which is the highest entry proof we can legally do in the US. And because Virginia is so humid, we have natural reduction in the cask. Over the years, as the angel share is happening, the alcohol's evaporating, water vapor is being pulled in, which is the opposite of, say, Balcones. I know guys in Texas who add water after 2 months of aging to their barrels to kind of balance this out.
Wow.
We're the opposite. So I'm finding ABVs anywhere from 120 proof down to, 114. And it's just fascinating. So I get to say, I like this proof. I like this experience. And yeah, we'll find a good home for them. It could be at a special retailer or an account.
Or single cask nation, right?
Or single cask nation.
Or single cask nation, yes. Okay,
like
got
that
it.
Swedish oak cask.
That's wonderful. So let's go into the third sample, cuvee. So there are a lot of details on your website about what goes into this cuvee, and I rather than me talking about it, I want you to tell us about what exactly goes into this, because there are so many different elements to it. But if you can also talk about the cask, because it's an STR cask, right?
Yes, it is.
It's
Yes,
okay.
it
So it's the
is.
famous Jim Swan STR cask. So tell us about the cuvee and what makes it special. So we're on the third sample right now, people.
So Jim Swan, this must be the biggest gift he gave us, and so many other distilleries too. He was working with Cavalon in Taiwan, and they put in a big order for these bourbon barrels, and they were told, you're out of luck. Scotland's got our next couple deliveries. You're gonna have to wait half a year. And he said, well, hang on a second. I've got lots of other contacts. I'm gonna find an alternative. So he started talking to a gentleman named Marco Mutino in Portugal and Miguel Martin in Spain, and they came up with this idea to take premium red wine casks, shave the inside staves, toast, and then do a light char, and then go the whiskey route coming in. And it's funny because he was a little bit inspired by the de-char, re-char of the bourbon world, and that's kind of what got translated out for STR, shave, toast, re-char, or repair. But wine casks aren't charred, they're toasted to begin with. And so that really bothered me. And also, originally they were taking the staves apart, shaving the inside stave just 3 to 5 millimeters, and then recoupering back together. But nobody does that anymore. For the most part, they have a machine that just comes in, scrapes it out without doing all the work of disassembly. And so cuvee refers to the first run of a premium red wine blend in Spain. And so that's why we went that route. We're trying to tell our story. But if you hear STR, just think that same process, shaving, toasting, doing a light char. And that brings out so much wood sugar. So this is my favorite, hands down.
Yeah, no, this is great. There's actually one of my favorite bottles from M&H out of Israel is they have a peated STR.
Yes, okay? They do.
Yes, they have a peated STR cask, and it's just amazing. It is just a wonderful combination. So let's again though talk. So again, explain exactly what cuvee is, okay, and then tell us about the different casks that are actually used for this.
Yes. So cuvee often refers to just a premium wine. You often see it looped with champagne. And in Spain, they often call that first run that's selected of a premium red wine blend a cuvee. And so all of these casks in their first life held a European red wine blend, highest quality. I do a lot of Grand Cru from different places. Chateau Palmer is the next order that I have coming through. And it's just really nice to be able to control the quality of these. So the gentleman that I'm working with, the bodegas in Spain, in Portugal, and in France, they're all gentlemen who worked with Jim Swan directly. And they're all relationships that I have because of Jim. And it's just really exciting to see the way those red fruit notes, raspberry, cherry cola, I get coffee, chocolate, blood orange, pecan, ginger, all coming through these casks. And it's just, I would pair it with a New York cheesecake or a flourless chocolate tort with a
it's funny you mentioned that, because I was thinking that the bourbon cask to me is so citrusy and light and refreshing. That's like a summer whiskey, okay? Yes. And this to me, it's a fireplace winter whiskey. It gives me that feeling, that it would be wonderful to have, and sort of like, in front of the fireplace, yes. and it's just amazing. I'm loving this. So let me ask you the question though about a lot of people are saying banana on all three of your expressions here. Okay. Yeah. Bananas are coming through. So, these are obviously aged in different ways, but it's the same it's same barley going into it. Why is banana so prevalent here? Can you, as somebody who studied with Nancy Fraley, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about this? And then I'll open it up to questions very soon. But yeah, tell us about this banana thing that's really coming through.
Yeah, Bananas Foster is one of those notes that I really love, and it originates from isoamyl acetate, which forms during the fermentation stage. So flavors start out in fermentation, and then distillation doesn't add any flavors at all, but it can concentrate them. And so if you're getting pear drop or this banana note, then just think in your head isoamyl acetate. And there are so many different flavors that I do look for. Diacetyl is a great one. It's buttery butterscotch that comes through in a really cool way for a lot of these as well. So I have specific ones that I really go for and think, all right, this is going to shine through. And the cool note is that it shows our DNA coming through. The barrels aren't covering up everything and dominating. So you still have the barley contributing its flavors. You still have the fermentation coming through, and then you have the barrels doing their job as well. So hopefully it's a balance.
Well, I got to.
Banana note. I love
People
it.
are loving this. After this is all said and done, Eric is also going to send you the comments because he can
Oh,
also
yes,
like
please.
get a
I would
copy of
love
so
that.
you can see about that. I have a few very quick points, and then we're going to open up for questions. All the wine casks that you've mentioned, it sounds like they're all coming from Europe, but
Yeah.
Virginia does have vineyards. So is there a reason why all of this is coming from Europe and why you're not using local wine casks?
I am using local wine casks, but for our VHW line. So I'm so
Okay.
happy you said that. So when we first started, we knew we wanted to tell our story. We wanted to focus on the barley, but we didn't want to do something that wasn't fully matured. And so because of Harry and Jim, we had some really good relationships in Scotland. So we started out by bringing over an aged distillate from a distillery in Scotland. The youngest we ever got was 6 year, most of it was 12 year and older. And then over the years, I did more and more bio until it's all our distillate. And what we did is we combined the two whiskeys together and finished them in local Virginia wine casks. And I also started using true port casks. So we have a port cask finished whiskey. And right now it's, I'd say 60% barrels from Portugal, but 40% port style wine casks from local Virginia wineries. I've worked with Stinson, King Family, Veritas, Paradise Springs. It's been so fun to find really high quality local casks. And yeah, it's really cool because I think this process brings those two whiskeys together in a really nice way by allowing them to finish and get all those nuances. So now that it's our own distillate that I'm working on completely 100%, I think having the Virginia casks really tells a great story there. I also have a cider finish. So we give our used barrels to
Nice.
cideries and breweries.
Yeah,
and
that's good in Virginia.
They'll give them back to us and we'll do a cider finish with the cask. So I have some barrels that I've treated back and forth 7 times now.
Nice.
And the local cideries, breweries, and wineries.
Okay. So one last very quick thing is that also according to your website, I just want to make sure everybody understands that the flagship expression for Virginia Distillery is courage and conviction, which is a blend of all 3 of these. Okay. And that was actually the first expression I had from your company that Brett Pompani told me that we should have at the fundraiser for the shelter. So the blend, again, according to your website, it's 50% of it comes from the bourbon cask, 25% from the sherry cask, and 25% cuvee cask. Okay,
yes,
that sounds like a wonderful combination.
Yeah,
yeah.
You can make your own blend right now, guys.
Don't tempt us. And actually, one of our guys, and I don't know if he's on tonight, Michael Bloom. I didn't see him on tonight. Too bad. I don't know if you've heard about this thing called the 50 state blend, but Michael Bloom, he's one of our friends who's usually on here. It's his brainchild. He's the one who created it. So once you tell people in this group to start blending things, you will go down a rabbit hole. So let's not go there right now. Eric, do you have any questions before we open it up to the rest of the group?
I do. So at the beginning, you mentioned that with the mash bill, same mash bill, but you end up putting in 2 different yeasts. Do you put those yeasts in at the same time, or do you do a staggered fermentation like some beer production?
We've experimented with staggering, but we now put them in at practically the same time, and we do a 3-day, 72-hour minimum fermentation.
Okay, cool. And then something more along on the packaging, since I have the packaging. So the bottle's really cool. And then in case some people don't know, they have these little medallions at the top that are actually magnetic. And so first of all, I guess, what made you guys decide to do that? And then just for the silly factor, I took 2 of them and I lined them up. So I now have a coin, 2 different colors on each different side.
I love that. I can take no credit for those medallions. That's our brand team. They're very creative, and every Friday they get together and do a what if brainstorming session, and whatever crazy the ideas they want, they do them. And it's so exciting because you never know. They'll get charity ideas. They love philanthropy, so that makes my heart beat happily. But yeah, they do this golf campaign, and they do a lot of nonprofits tied with golf. So these are ball markers too, and they have hat clips that they can like stick on, and it's a whole thing. So they're super geeky and I love them all.
Right.
So that's the answer.
This hat
That's
tip?
that. You've got one. That's awesome.
This is not your normal group,
You guys
Amanda.
are
You
so
know.
prepared. It's amazing.
Yeah, and the fact that I had it like available.
Ready to roll?
within-
You know?
I don't even have one of those.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
It was
and
funny,
also-
Amanda,
And also
when you were
thank you for
mentioning.
the stickers and the pens that we also
Yes.
got out. To
Thank you for
everybody.
those. Yes, thank you for those. It was funny when you were mentioning that those magnetic things can be used for golf markers. Right at the same time you were saying it, my friend Paul Mangera wrote exactly that. It would be a
Great
great
minds.
ball marker, for golf, because he golfs all the time, which is great. All right, so we're going to go on to Ariel Eisenberg. Ariel, if you can please unmute.
So I'm one of the people that Gil tries to limit my questions successfully. I only have two. You were talking about how you get a majority of the barrels that you use for the bourbon cask from just across the border. Do y'all ever play around with like rye casks?
Oh, you know what? We've talked about it. I have never once for Virginia Distillery Company worked with a rye cask. Not once.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
but I'd like to. Tequila's up there for me as well. So
And then you were saying you had learned that, for ocean transport with the casks, you want to keep about 18% of the fluid in there. You had mentioned, you sample it, get the notes and whatnot. Do y'all just dump it then? Or do you somehow incorporate it into, a sellable product?
the team likes to drink it. So we have a little cabinet inside our distillery office, and it has different things for people to try. And every month I do a Fun Friday so people can experience whiskey from around the world. And sometimes we do other things in addition to the whiskey, and it's a really fun teaching tool for them to get to try a really great wine, or sometimes something fortified. So we've had sherry nights, we've had port nights, and it's fun.
That's awesome. So if someone like Gil were to take a tour of the Virginia Distillery Company, is that something that might be part of the tour?
It's never been part of the
for
tour
a media
before.
influencer like Gil.
For someone like Gil, we'd probably have some fun up in the cask house, and yeah.
There you go. Thank you. Very
I
much.
don't know what to say. I'm flattered. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you,
Just looking out for you.
Amanda. That's wonderful. That's just great. Actually, it's funny what you were talking about drinking in the distillery. One of the distilleries that I was at, that's not going to be mentioned now, will the master distiller has essentially his own infinity cask, and he just, any cask that he finds that he likes, he just makes sure that he puts some of it into this infinity cask, and it keeps growing, and he's been doing it over the years, and it's been around for 20 years.
Wow.
And I've tasted from the cask, and it's just freaking incredible. It's so much
That's
fun.
very cool.
Yeah, it's great. All right, Josh, please unmute.
Hi. All right. Thanks. So love them all. Really love the Cuvée cask. Just amazing. And I was curious if you could share. So this is my opinion, but my palate is picking up more of that caramelized banana bread in that one than the other two. And so I'm curious, what is happening with the interplay of the cuvee that's making that occur differently than the sherry or the bourbon cask? It is very much more pronounced.
Yeah, I found that the lactones in our bourbon casks bring more coconut and citrus notes to the forefront, where the sherry is more dominated by the darker fruit. And there's more of a balance struck with these cuvee casks, and there are exceptions. So, I mean, depending on which ones I'm looking at, it's very different. I've experimented with everything from, we call it a char, but it's really just a heavy toast. So like a level 0 char all the way up to a level 2 char. And interestingly, I found that the level 1 chars seem to bring out the most banana notes, and it's not the charring at all that does that. I think it's just the level of interaction that the whiskey is able to get in those casks. seems to drive that home a little bit more. So that took me a while to narrow down and see that. But it does make me, really mindful of how even little tiny tweaks can make a difference in the flavors that pull through.
Yeah, for sure. And then the second part of that question is, I apologize if you said this before, the cuvee casks, are they American oak? Are they French oak? What kind of oak or what kind of wood is it?
They're mostly Quercus alba American oak. There are a handful, because I always like experimentals and what comes over from France, that is Limousin oak. But yeah, I would say probably 98% of the barrels that we have aging are Quercus alba.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I want Paul Barron to come on. Paul, if you can do me a favor and unmute yourself. Amanda's been busy during the interview, so I don't know how much she's been able to read the comments. I'd like you, Paul, to tell us what you posted in the comments here. I want Amanda to hear it from you about a comparison that you just made.
So from the bourbon onward, it's a beautiful grain-forward whiskey. I get a ton of orchard fruits, a nice light acidity, right? And that always reminds me of one of my favorite grain-forward scotches, the beautiful Glenfarclas. And so I did have to pour myself a bit of Glenfarclas 25. That definitely has more oak tannins and everything else, right? Nowhere near the same. But the essence and the character, this is really the first American single malt that brings me to some of my favorite beginning points of Scotch, right? I know a lot of people are trying to do, peated barley in the US, this, that, the other thing, but I don't feel like people are getting the basic DNA and recipe of classic single malt well yet. And this is my first experience really getting the basics really right.
It's so funny you said Glenfarclas because, and we've been talking about Jason, who I'm hanging out with tomorrow. One of the first things he said to me was, I fell in love with your whiskey, and I have to tell you, it reminds me of something. You're going to think I'm crazy, Glenfarclas. And I was like, well.
This is why I love Jason.
Yeah,
Wow.
I've heard it a handful of times, and it's a huge compliment because they've been doing so phenomenally for so long. And I'm so young in the industry. I mean, 7 years with the company, or 7.5, and it's really exciting because yes, we don't want to cut corners, and we knew that the distillate mattered and we had to get it right. And I do have to credit, like, our team is innovative and they're very passionate, work very hard, and they are so attuned to perfection, but they also learn from the best. I learned from Jim and Harry and Nancy, and so we knew what to do to achieve the quality, and that was such a leg up.
Yeah, and literally nosing these side by side, it's really the nose where you're getting that, like, it's very much a DNA thing going on here.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the fact that both you and Jason Johnstone Yellen are comparing. I mean, that's pretty freaking amazing, Paul. Are comparing this to Glenfarclas. So Amanda, that is that's pretty impressive. So just for that, that should make your night, I hope, because that's pretty impressive right there. So we did talk. So since we're talking about Jason, I want to bring Michael Nolan on right now. If Nolan's still around, and Michael, are you with us still?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. So I'd like you to hold up the single cask nation bottle, and I'd like you to talk to us about it a little bit, and I'd like Amanda to talk to us a little bit about it too, please. So this is what, it's a 5-year, is that correct?
It's 5 years sherry. I mean, it's dark as night. I mean, this is a super dark whiskey. But I really think Amanda should talk. But before you get into that, because I have to get Jason really drunk to tell me these things. When's the next Virginia Distillery single cask nation coordination combo where you're releasing another cask?
He will have to say when, but his last visit, we looked at a couple of casks, and I said, hold off, because I feel like October is a really good time to pick a cask, because it was the heat of August, and I just was saying, like, hold off. It can be a little volatile in the cask house, and you want the cask to be showing really well. So he might be picking one tomorrow.
I'll send him a
That
note
might be
telling him he
part of why
better
he's
pull a good
coming.
one this time, because the last one's gonna be hard to,
I know. We'll go a different direction this time, I think.
yeah.
Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the taste on that?
Well, let me pour some.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna twist your arm for that one. Okay, Michael.
I started with it, so
Send us all samples, Michael.
I can do that. I mean, it's really, it's amazing cask, but it's very, I mean, it's just, for 5 years old, it's so dark, it's amazing. But it's just also very, it's really sherry influence. So you have to like sherry whiskeys, but it's heavy and syrupy and what you'd expect out of that. But I think it's also interesting, the note about bananas, because it carries through all these whiskeys. It's amazing.
You know, when I'm walking through our fermentation tanks in the distillery and I breathe really deeply, I get apricot and banana nut bread. It's like the #1 thing. So yeah.
Nice.
But even with this heavily sherried, you still get that in the back of the palate, the banana. It's amazing. It's just really interesting.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, for sharing that. So I see Paul Barrett is raising his hand. See, last time I just called on him without raising his hand, but now he's raising his hand. So Paul, can you unmute, please?
Yes, thank you. Last time was for you, Gil. Now I'm being selfish, and these are my questions. But I do just want to say, look at the first note that I have for the tasting of the palate on that bourbon. What's that saying?
Apricot. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Well done.
Yeah, I'm kind of freaking out a little bit. So
That's awesome.
but I want to talk a little bit about fermentation. Do you guys do like a longer fermentation? That's when I tend to see a lot of the banana esters and other things. Is that part of what's happening? And then on the stone fruit and the pear side, I was talking to Rachel Berry once, fantastic, about where Ben Riach in particular gets a lot of the orchard fruit notes that it has. And she was saying that for them, she believes it's the water chemistry going into fermentation. So I'm wondering from your perspective, where some of those pear notes you think are coming from in your whiskeys.
Yeah, something that you hear about all the time is water. I mean, in Kentucky, they're always talking about the limestone. For us, what really made us excited was our water is remarkably soft. The other places in the world that you're going to find it that soft, well, the one that comes to mind is like Pilsner area. You're going to find that's really going to hit the pH of the fermentation and be very impactful. So I think about water during fermentation, but I also think about it during reduction. And we add water, of course, after we've made our heart cut and we're reducing down to 62.5. But then again, we're adding water to bring it down to 46% ABV. And I think that one of the things I learned from Nancy Fraley is do your reductions very slowly. Most distilleries do a massive reduction in like a week's time because there's pressure. You only have so much space and you've got to bottle and hit your deadlines. I have a whole vatting house. So I can take months and months to what we call land the plane. And so I often will add just 1% percentage point of water to reduce down a week, usually on Wednesdays. And so that means that we're going to control the chemistry of the distillation results. So all those beautiful notes that do come during fermentation, and again, minimum of 3 days, usually a little bit more, we're not losing that. We're guarding it by being so gradual with reducing it. And so, yeah, I think water impacts in a ton of ways.
And I know that various students of Nancy's, if you will, are very, very big on the time that it takes to proof it down and the method in which to do so. And I've heard a little bit of petit eau as well, right?
I don't do that, but yes, a lot of times that's, she's really, I played around with Boise with her in Texas. I was at Denison for an Iron Root getaway. And yeah, we definitely talked about that for hours and hours. And I think it's a really great tool for people to have.
And the fermentation times question on the banana esters?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can smell it by day 2. Definitely by day 3. you can see it coming through. Like I said, banana nut bread. Walnut is another note that I'm guessing you guys were able to pick out in one, if not two or three of the whiskeys today. And a lot of times when you hear walnut, you're thinking wood and oak contact, but I think there's a little bit of that from the fermentation as well. Just that combination of yeasty, bready, banana, all of that coming together.
Yeah,
Thank you.
wonderful. William Myers texted a question here. Myers, can you unmute please and ask your
Sure.
question?
Sure. I wasn't sure. I know at one time, I believe allegedly you guys were sourcing some single malt from Scotland, and I wasn't sure if you are still doing that or if you are now on your 100% distillate or.
Yeah, that was back in 2015. We started out, we brought over whiskey distilled and aged in Scotland. Again, youngest was 6-year-old, most of it was 12 and older, and started out almost entirely that finished in local Virginia wine casks, and that was the VHW line. Anything Courage and Conviction is always and will always be 100% ours. But that, of course, took years to age up. And so we didn't really get into that for, I'd say, 5 years. So yeah, the VHW line, the port cask finish, the cider cask finish. We had brewer's batch, which was a beer cask finish. For several years, it was roughly 50% whiskey distilled and aged in Scotland, 50% ours. I started weaning off of the Scottish distillate to move into 100% ours. And the way we're still kind of doing old world versus new world and showing that through is I use true port barrels from Portugal and local Virginia wines. There's still that, or for the cider, Calvados and local Virginia cider casks. So it's more of the barrel aging now that tells that story. But for years, it was a combination of whiskey distilled in Scotland for the VHW line. But Courage and Conviction, our American single malt, has always been just ours. And so back originally, if you got the old labels for VHW, it'll say American blended malts, not the American single malts.
Myers, I'm curious, knowing your ridiculously extensive collection, do you have any of those bottles that had some of the original stuff?
Except that I was in Jefferson City today because my wife is one of the finalists for Missouri Teacher of the Year. So one of 7 finalists. So they had a big banquet last night. And unfortunately, I fell and hurt my knees and my hands and my phone, which is why I wasn't able to log in as I was driving home. So I probably have one, but I've been hobbling around like a 90-year-old pirate. So just and even your Macallan Grand Reserva is almost within like arm's reach. In fact, you probably see it on camera, but yeah, no, I've been I'm sure that tomorrow it will be much worse. So so I probably
good luck with that.
Have some. Thank you. Am I able to either before or after the recording stops reveal where allegedly it was from?
Amanda, is he allowed to talk about it, or do you want to wait till the recording ends?
I would say stop the recording.
Okay, we'll talk about that one later.
When the recording ends, I will. It's a place that has nice shrubberies, correct?
Okay, all right. We're stopping you now. We're stopping you now. Eisenberg, you have another question?
I do. And William, sorry about your knee, but I had knee surgery last week, so some sympathy. So VHW is your main line, the old label. Where does the name Courage and Conviction come from?
That's a great question. We were founded by an Irishman, George Moore. He came over on a scholarship to George Washington University in the early 70s. And man, he loved single malt whiskey. He was just a massive collector of it. And he ended up in the tech field, lived in California for a little while, helped integrate caller ID, but he settled his family back in Virginia as soon as he could. And he had this idea that he wanted to be involved with the first big American single malts. And he always said, have the courage of your convictions. He didn't create that phrase, but he said it all the time. And he passed away, and his wife and son are just heading up the company now. His wife, Angela, is really our owner, and his son, Gareth, is our CEO, and they're the ones who hired me. And when 2020 hit, we had planned our big launch of Courage and Conviction, and we didn't have a name for it. And we were like, should we go for it? It's the middle of a pandemic. What do we do? What do we call it? And the name Courage and Conviction just kind of stood out. And so we named it that. We released it. We got 96 points from Wine Enthusiast the month we released it, and we sold out really quickly and thought, oh gosh, this is working well. So the name just stuck and we didn't look back.
Very nice. Excellent. Ariel, any other questions or are you good now? Okay, we just lost Ariel, I think, but okay. So
No, I
Amanda.
I muted myself.
Oh wow,
I saved you the trouble.
dude. I'm raising a glass to you, dude. That's beautiful, man. I love that. So Amanda, I'm gonna finish up with one last question for me, and then we're going to wrap it up. American single malt as a category. Okay, it has been in the press lately. Locally here, we're all friends with Paul Hletko, okay, who's been, a leader, of course, in trying to get standards for American single malt. Can you tell us a little bit about the landscape, and your feelings about the standards and how that might help the industry?
Yeah, there has not been a significant law passed about American whiskey since 1969. So it has been quite a battle. We're founding members of the American Single Malt Commissions. So Westland has been fighting the fight. Balcones has been fighting the fight. It's been such a cool moment because I've really seen that a rising tide floats all ships. And it feels like we're all just like a band of brothers going through this. And I would always say that I love bourbon, but it's become the great American comfort blanket. And rye has its place. People understand typically the difference between bourbon and rye. But just seeing this rising awareness of another category, I think when I first started making whiskey, I would hear people say, single malt, that's peated and it's really smoky. And they didn't even understand that there's so much even in Scotland that is unpeated. They didn't understand so much about, they'd still say, well, what's the mash bill for single malt? So being able to get these standards of identity in place will not only protect the quality of the whiskey being made from the consumer level, it's going to inform them and educate them and protect them as well. And I think that's huge. So I can't wait. I'm very excited. The TTB has finally put together a list that we've all agreed on. It's really just now waiting to see, because we've had this feedback phase and some people pushed back. One of the biggest pushbacks we got was originally about the age limitations. We don't age anything under 4 years now. The youngest we ever released anything years ago was 3. But what a slap in the face to Balcones, which is a totally different environment. If they were to wait 3 years, like we already talked about, they could have some very over-oaked casks and lose a lot. So to force them to play by the rules of Scotland just isn't fair. And I always say, like, the whole nation of Scotland can fit inside Virginia. And we're like the 32nd or 33rd largest state. So we have such a diverse world to develop our whiskey. Our climates are so different. And I think that once we have these standards of identity in, we can start explaining the differences and we can really grow from there. So I'm incredibly excited. I think it's probably going to be another few months at least before anything is published, but the buzz is there, the energy is there, and I think people are hungry for it.
I love that you mentioned Balcones, because as I mentioned, I visited the distillery, and I don't know if people notice, but above Amanda, you see a TARDIS on her bookshelf. Okay. And so I'm thinking that maybe, I'm thinking that maybe some of those casks might be bigger on the inside than the outside. But the reason I'm mentioning that is that I don't know if you know this, but Jared Hempstead is a huge sci-fi geek, and he and I went to see Dune together when it opened in the theaters last year. He took out a whole theater. And for people from the distillery, and I happened to be there, and I joined them to see Dune on opening weekend with Jared, because he's such a big sci-fi geek. And I don't know if you know that or not, but now you do. It's we have a lot of he's a great guy, but we have a lot of things in common going on here. So what I'd like everybody to do right now, I'd like everybody to, if you're so inclined, to pour yourself another dram. I am actually going back to the bourbon, because it's just so refreshing. It's just wonderful. And I'd like everybody to unmute. Everybody, if you could please unmute everybody.
Uh-oh.
What do you mean? Uh-oh. There we go.
Unmuted.
And I'd like everybody to join me in saying cheers and thank you to Amanda Beckwith from Virginia Distillery.
Thank you, Amanda.
Cheers. Thank you, Amanda.
Cheers to Amanda Beckwith from Virginia Distillery.
Amanda, this is wonderful. Do you have any final words for us?
Oh, thank you for being ambassadors for the American single malt category. That is so heartwarming. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing the love.
Ooh, diplomatic
appreciate it.
community.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very much.
Amanda.
Everybody stay around. I got a few quick announcements after we turn off the recording. Thank you again, Amanda. This was wonderful.